Recently, I watched a video called 666 Explained, linked in the description, that brought out the need to explain some things. Many think the term apocalyptic literature refers to a coping or fear-mongering genre that's always been around, and the Bible just copied that with coded language about good and evil. But let's look at some definitions and history for the term. So turning to our slides here, let's go to these definitions from a couple of different sources, also in the description. The first one says, apocalyptic literature depicts a writer's vision of the end of the world. The term is applied to both contemporary and classical literature, but in the world of literary analysis, it's most common as a descriptor for religious end times writing, such as that found in the book of Revelation. Now, they got Revelations, and I showed my disdain there on the screen. That isn't very comforting when you're looking for, as I try to say, 2 or 3 witnesses per the Bible's injunction. But it will do because it matches up with a more well-known source, the Encyclopedia Britannica. Apocalyptic literature is a genre of religious writing that predicts significant future events, particularly focusing on the end of the world and divine judgments. This genre has deep roots in the ancient Middle East, with notable prevalence in Jewish and early Christian texts. Central works include the Book of Daniel and the Book of Revelation, which employ rich symbolism to convey messages of hope and warning amidst persecution. Of course, I'm stopped there to say this is a secular source, so take that for what it's worth. The term apocalypse derives from the Greek word meaning revelation, underscoring the theme of unveiling hidden truths about the future. And again, this matches up with the first definition where it had the genre literature had its origins in the religious writing of the early Christianity, as well as exilic Jewish culture. And they've also mentioned the Book of Daniel and visions of the future, etc. So we have our definition of what apocalyptic literature is, but did you notice the origins of the term? It started with the Bible. As stated in the second definition, the title Revelation comes from the first word in the Greek text, apocalypsis. There was no apocalyptic literature before the Bible. So anyone claiming the Bible borrowed it from other cultures is simply misinformed. Now, nonfiction is often used to convey unpleasant truth. Not nonfiction, I meant said that backwards. Fiction is often used to convey unpleasant truths. The example I've used before is Orwell's Animal Farm, which is a political allegory about the Bolshevik Revolution. But the Bible is not a book of fiction, which is what people imply when they say it's all allegory. So let me emphasize, if you call the Bible, or even just an entire book of it, allegory, you're calling it fiction. Of course, the Bible can contain various genres, figures of speech, allegories, and whatever, but to decree that the entire book of Revelation is allegory is a lazy cop-out for material deemed too outrageous to be taken literally or physically, which is an appeal to incredulity fallacy. So now let's look at Revelation 13:11-17 and see if we can justify classifying it as allegory, especially the beast's name and number being etched into a person's forehead or right arm, right hand. And I would say also that the wrist was considered part of the hand. But it says, then I saw another beast ascending out of the earth, and it had 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon. Now I've got some underlined words coming up. These are all present tense, which is important. We'll see in a little bit. It wields all the authority of the first beast and makes all the earth dwellers worship it, the one that was healed from the fatal wound. It does great miraculous signs, such as making fire fall from the sky to the earth in front of everyone, and it misleads, present, the earth dwellers through the signs it was given to do in the presence of the first beast. It told them to make an image of the beast that had the fatal wound but lived. It was allowed to give spirit to the image of the beast so that it could talk and to put to death anyone who would refuse to worship the image. It also forces, present tense, everyone, small or great, rich or poor, free or slave, to accept an inscription, that is also present, on their right hand or forehead. No one will be able to buy or sell without having the inscription of either the name or the number of the beast. Now, I'm going to ask some silly questions, which you'll find out why. Does anyone think that people will stop being deceived between the times the second beast does miraculous signs, unless the signs are continuous. I don't think so. But that's what the 666 video argues when it says people are only doomed as long as they have the mark on them so they can be saved when the mark isn't present. Therefore, the mark isn't physical or literal, but only a reference to having loyalty to the beast. And it justifies this by saying that since Revelation 14:9 references the forehead and right hand, then it must get its contextual meaning from Deuteronomy 6:8. I know, that's silly. It's just what they say. But here's Deuteronomy 6:6-8. Let these words that I'm commanding you today be always on your heart. Teach them repeatedly to your children. Talk about them while sitting in your house, walking on the road, lying down, getting up. Tie them as reminders on your forearm. Bind them on your forehead. So this is the crazy logic. The claim is that since it's obvious in that context in Deuteronomy that God didn't intend for them to put physical objects on their bodies, then in Revelation, it must also be a non-physical mark of the beast. But do they really believe people will have to basically recite a pledge of loyalty to the beast for every financial transaction? That's what a spiritualized or symbolic view of the mark would require. And how would anyone know when this symbolic mark would be fulfilled? Since this is prophecy rather than a part of some solemn commands of the past to remember the law. Since the video claims that worships present the beast and takes the mark in Revelation 14:9 are continuous actions in Greek, meaning you're only doomed as long as you keep worshiping or keep taking the mark, let's look at these words grammatically. Okay, so first what we have here is interlinear, and I have put boxes around the two words in question. Is worshiping the wild animal or beast, or is taking the inscription? And I'll just do a little side note to say worship, I may go over this in a future video. The word there means literally to kiss the hand or to bow before. And there's some people doing videos that quibble about whether or not to call something worship. But as I said, we may cover that in a future video. But anyway, the point here is that whatever they're doing, bowing to the beast, or if you call it worship, and taking the inscription, those are present tense. And more than that, we'll get into that in a minute. Notice it looks like each word ends in what looks like EI. Epsilon iota, but it's EI. Okay, and then that's the grammatical ending for that. Okay, so they're saying that because they're present tense, that this is a significantly different meaning than most people have thought of it. But now let's look at those two words in the lexicon. And we can see the first one, to take or accept or obtain or receive, ending with that what looks like EI. In the column next to the G2983 says verb, present, active, indicative, third person singular. Okay, so it isn't just present, it's present, active, indicative. Okay, hold on a second. We'll do the other word. It also ends in what looks like EI, and it's also present, active, indicative. Okay. So just so we know, yes, they are written in present tense, but present, active, and indicative. So what does that mean? Okay, so the present, active, indicative forms of, this is a sample word, luo, that they're using here, might also be translated, I am loosing, you are loosing, he, she, it, plural, they are loosing, okay? In English, we may mean one thing if we say he pitches, and something a bit different if we say he is pitching. In the former case, we may mean he regularly plays the position of pitcher. That's baseball, of course. In the latter case, we may mean he is pitching at this very moment. But here's the key. In Greek, the present active indicative is used for both of these ideas. In both cases, they say actions art, it's a German word, but it means specific things in grammar, but we won't go into that right now, is linear. But in one case, the action is habitual or iterative. When translating from Greek, you will need to let the nature of the verb and especially the context of its use determine whether or not to use the ing ending in English, whether it's pitching or pitches in this example. And we can say the same thing for any of these present tense verbs in Greek. Okay, so we've got some ambiguity here, so it isn't cut and dried as the video may lead you to believe. Now, here's a bit from one of the Greek grammar teaching sites that says the aspect of the grammatical mood of a verb, there's tense, mood, voice, etc. The mood has to do with the statement's relationship to reality. In broad terms, mood deals with the fact of whether the asserted statement is actual or if there is only the possibility of its actual occurrence. Whether the verbal idea is objectively a fact or not is not the point. Mood represents the way in which the matter is conceived. If the one asserting the sentence states it as actual, then the mood reflects this regardless of whether the statements are actually true or false. The person writing is stating it as a fact. The indicative mood is the only mood conceived of as actual. All the others, imperative, subjunctive, and optative, the action is only thought of as possible or potential. So that's what when we say it's in the indicative mood, it's the real mood. Okay, so it's a reality, not an allegory. The indicative mood is a statement of fact or an actual occurrence from the writer's or speaker's perspective. Even if the writer is lying, he may state the action as if it is a fact, and thus the verb would be in the indicative mood. It may be action occurring in the past, present, or future time. This statement of fact can even be made with a negative adverb modifying the verb, and this is in contrast to the other moods. So that's one grammar site about what the indicative mood is. And before we go into this next slide I've got up here, let me just summarize. Present with indicative means a current action. Active means the subject does the verb, and indicative means actual or factual, not allegorical. So in this context, it means whoever worships the beast and takes the mark. Okay? And we have an example here from Matthew 4:5, and I have it in the interlinear just to show you the endings of the words are that what looks like EI again for both of the boxed words. And it's saying the devil is taking Jesus, if you're very hyper literal, devil is taking Jesus to the highest point of the temple and is showing him all the world's kingdoms. So the word rendered taking is also present, active, indicative. Does this mean the devil continuously took Jesus there? Of course not. So even though it's present, active, indicative, it doesn't mean it's happening right now. It could be, but it doesn't have to be. And this can be a judgment call sometimes, but it is taken from the context. So this is a literary device that's often used to put the reader into the event. And it happens quite a lot in the Gospels, but we still do this today. For example, we might say, okay, get this, I'm sitting there minding my business. Suddenly the squirrel snatches my candy bar. Sitting, minding, and snatches are all in the present tense, even though the one-off event is in the past. That's just how we express things sometimes. They put you in the story, and just because the New Testament writers are putting you in the story doesn't mean it's fiction. That's just how they're describing a scene, and they want you to see it. Okay, so the squirrel is not continually snatching the candy bar. I'm putting the listener into the event when I say that. And I just did it again. Am I putting the listener in that story? I am putting this present tense, even though I'm not continually putting them in the story. I did it once. In the same way, we can't just mechanically take the Greek grammar of Revelation 14:9 to mean something people are condemned for only as long as they keep worshiping the beast and keep taking the mark, and can be saved once they stop doing those things. That's the problem with this sloppiness in the Greek grammar, according to them, their interpretation. This all highlights the danger of surface skimming, Greek grammar especially. Deep grammar isn't for everyone, even for those who've gone to seminary, since most of them don't get more than an introductory course on the ancient languages if they study it at all. But I went into detail on this one point to show one of the ways people are led astray from the literal historical grammatical hermeneutic or interpretation method to allegorization or spiritualization, because appeals to the Greek are often seen as authoritative and indisputable by those who don't know it. If somebody says, look here in this Greek grammar, see what it says, I'm right, that doesn't necessarily mean they are. There's a difference between sounding educated and actually being educated. So what have we learned? The Bible, first of all, coined the term apocalyptic literature. That's where it started. The second thing we've learned is the Bible must not be broad-brushed as all allegory or spiritualization, meaning it's all fiction. And the third point is there can be dire consequences for this, such as giving people the false hope that they can still be saved after they worship the beast and take the mark. That's the main point I want to make about all this. There's a disturbing trend for people to jump to every new idea they hear, especially if it goes against long-held beliefs, and even more so if it involves the Bible. There's also a growing antagonism against taking Revelation literally, especially the closer we get to its fulfillment. It is indeed scary for the unsaved, so why do so many Christians want so badly to write it off as already fulfilled or never to be literally fulfilled? I've said many times before that prophecy is the fingerprint of God on the Bible and takes up about a third of its content. So to ignore or dismiss it as too controversial or fear-mongering or fiction is exactly what I'd expect the devil to say. Of course, I'm not saying all who aren't futurists are of the devil, but that the teaching leading away from its literal fulfillment certainly is. As we've seen, there are people who are going to say it's okay to take the mark of the beast. I can only hope that after the rapture, there may be some people who come across this video or others like it so they can reject the mark and trust Jesus instead of being lost to eternity. But that's why it's important to go over these things. We can't just say, why are we even covering prophecy, as most of the churches do today? They don't want to cover it for one excuse or another. And we can't be so easily swayed by people who are showing you Greek and not understanding it. Because like I said, you can surface skim the Greek source material and look at the words and go, look, it's present tense, it's happening right now. Or in this case, with the 666 video, saying that the mark of the beast must be symbolic rather than literal for two reasons. One, look at it matches this verse in Deuteronomy, which is about tying the scriptures on your forehead or your right arm. And the other thing being that since they believe the mark is non-literal, non-physical, then you can take it up and put it down at your whim, and therefore you're only doomed as long as you've taken it up. We had to go into some grammatical detail to show why that's wrong, but I don't think it even takes that to show why it's dangerous. So be careful who you listen to, and don't be snowed over by Greek grammar or Hebrew grammar, whatever the situation calls for, but get a second opinion. You know, your spiritual health is more important than your physical health, so if you would get a second opinion on something that, especially that it goes against everything you've heard, not that we're afraid of such things as we get accused, but that it's due diligence to look for contrary arguments. And there's not enough of that going on in Christianity. So as it is with this 666 video, and also the point, as I started out saying, that apocalyptic literature isn't just something the Bible decided to use to make people afraid or control them, but that it coined the term, started the genre, at least to any significant degree. So they name apocalyptic literature after the first word of the book of Revelation, apocalypsis. So I asked in the description, where did it originate? Is it fiction? Is it fearful? Or is it future? Is it just a parable? Or to use Michael Heiser's term, theological messaging? Or what a lot of other people still use, phenomenological language? Say that 5 times fast. It's none of those things. As we've seen, it's literal. The context tells you how to take it. And just because you can find similar wording elsewhere in the Bible doesn't mean you can just swap contexts. There's many hundreds of references to Daniel and other parts of the Old Testament in the book of Revelation. It is the finishing, the unsealing of all the Old Testament prophecies remaining. And so it's going to have many of those references, just like the two witnesses I've gone over in other prophecy videos, where we have the two olive trees or lampstands in the Old Testament, and they're seen in Revelation. And people who don't know that will come up with crazy ideas that this is somehow a new idea introduced in Revelation that they can make up the meanings for, that it's not two people, it's the church, or it's Israel and Gentile or whatever. There's a gazillion theories. But they're wrong because they're ignorant of the reference to the Old Testament. In this case, they're not ignorant of the reference to the Old Testament regarding the right hand and forehead, but they misapplied it by swapping context and not letting Revelation use the term as it wants to use the term, not just to fulfill a prophecy, because in the Old Testament case, it wasn't a prophecy. It was a memorial. So it's not even a similar context. So that and all the grammatical details that we've seen should, I hope, be convincing enough to say, just be careful who you listen to. And especially if you hear something that is off the wall, like that interpretation that you can take the mark and be saved because the mark isn't going to literally be etched on your skin, you should at least have a red flag go up. Okay? And that's all I have to say about that. Thanks for listening.